sound amazing. The feel of playing it under your fingers, especially when you're playing fingerstyle and that sort of thing, the amount of effort that goes into the sound that comes out is incredible. And then just the playability of it. It was like the way his neck design works and the way the strings bounced off the fretboard. It just made everything very easy for me. I always found when I played those guitars, I could play things that I couldn't play on other instruments or would only achieve 10% of the time, but on that guitar I'd achieve 90% of the time.
Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. I'm your host, Jamie Gale. Today on Life with Strings Attached, I'm joined by Australian instrumental guitarist Adam Miller, a phenomenal player whose ability to improvise independent melodies, harmonies, and bass lines all at the same time while maintaining an impeccable groove has earned him the respect of the global guitar community. Adam is one of those rare artists who understands that music is not just performance, but it's a process, from recording and production to collaboration, touring, and the evolving relationship between musicians and the instruments that they choose. In this conversation, we explore how technology has reshaped the way music is made and released, why Adam still thinks in albums rather than singles, and how boutique guitar makers, multi-scale, design, and extended range instruments have influenced his sound. We also talk about Australian guitar culture, the idea of legacy in instruments, and what it really means to find individuality in music, and when the guitar becomes not just a tool, but also your long-term creative partner. This is a wide-ranging, thoughtful conversation with an artist who, like myself, is always asking why, not just how. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Adam Miller, and I hope that you do as much as I did. Adam Miller. Great
Jamie
to see
Gale.
you. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for being on Life with Strings Attached.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's wonderful. This is I'm really looking forward to this interview because you have such a breadth of experience and knowledge. And so I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but I expect it to be good.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds great. I like the no plan idea. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, this is it's not an interview. They're conversations. They always are, and so this is simply about my life and the people I'm connected to because of guitar, who aren't necessarily guitarists like yourself, but many different folks. And so, you're at home in Australia right now?
I am home in Newcastle, Australia. I've just been for a mountain bike ride, so I tried very hard to de-sweat myself before we began. But I'm trying to find my little towel for when it starts to be. We don't have air conditioning here either, so by the time it's under lights, middle of summer, it gets warm.
Yes,
very warm.
Is air conditioning a normal thing in Australia or not?
It's not as normal as it is in other places, strangely enough. And our houses are like cardboard boxes. They basically, if it's hot outside, it's hotter inside, and if it's cold outside, it's colder inside. It's great. But anyway, we live in a little apartment, so no, we do not have air conditioning or the ability to put it in. So yeah, but that's okay.
No, it's all right. Because you well know I'm Canadian, and there we spend a lot of time trying to regulate our temperature, both hot and cold.
Of course.
But I'm in Italy right now, and they don't really air condition at all here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some environments where you have to for a factory or something, but generally speaking, people just accept that it's hot or cold and try and live with it in a different kind of way. And so I wasn't sure about Australia because So we have so much in common with Canada and Australia. It's not, the construction of your houses is very much the same.
Yeah,
but it sounds like you treat it differently. So
yeah.
Wonderful.
Classic. Yeah.
And so So you've got a lot of things going. You've got different releases happening right now. You've been on tour. Every time you're one of my dare I say friends that I might think I could run into kind of anywhere. And whenever we talk, it's where are you in the world? Where are you in the world?
It does seem to be that way.
And so, what have you been up to lately?
This year has been a little bit of touring, like touring in Australia. a little bit of US touring. I think I just did one big tour in August. Two releases, so a new album that's called Timing, which was recorded with my LA trio, my Los Angeles-based trio. And then we also released this cool recording we did live at the Foo Fighters Studio 606, which was for Neumann microphones. So, that's called the Neumann Sessions. And so that got released as audio and on YouTube as well. So that was, it's been a big year kind of for getting music out there and getting, video content and all that sort of thing. So it's been good.
Yeah. And that's great looking content. I presume that was the Neumann crew who or Neumann arranged all of that. Because I've seen some of those videos. They look fantastic. The quality of it looks great.
Yeah, it's actually a great
audio and video.
Yeah, they start with the video team. They're a bunch of guys in LA that have actually led by a guy named Tom. What's the company called? Mixbus Marketing, maybe? Ooh, now I don't know. But they do a lot of the video stuff for high-end audio companies. They've just developed this niche because Tom that runs the company is an audio engineer, understands it, knows how to present content correctly for that market. And they, companies know they're going to get it right. So that was the video crew. And then the audio crew was really just the house engineers. And there was one guy from Sennheiser who had a little bit of discussion about trying to make things work. And then myself and Justin Glasgow that plays the drums with me, we just, did a little bit of tweaking to everything as we went as well. And then the final audio mix for that was actually mine. I actually mixed and mastered that recording. So, yeah, pretty fun to pull up.
Was that arranged from the beginning?
No. But
okay.
Yeah, as these things happen. But I was always going to take it. Like on the day I made sure I left the studio with the recordings, because even if it didn't end up that my mixes got used, I still wanted to be able to do it. So it was because for those that don't know, Dave Grohl bought the Sound City Neve console, and so that's what lives in this studio, and that's the console that was used to record Nirvana albums and Fleetwood Mac Rumors, and then they're the two that come to the top of my head, but so many things. And so that Neve console is pretty legendary. So to be able to pull up a mix of me playing through it was pretty cool. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's been a recent topic of discussion because, all right, so at this upcoming NAMM show, I'm on a panel discussion about basically making how to protect the financial interests in making music and those who make and sell the music. It's with some people from NVIDIA and Spotify and SoundCloud and a bunch of people who I have no business being in a discussion with, but they put me on it just because of, my way of doing things. So nonetheless, I've been really thinking about money in the music scene and how it's evolved. And many people talk about, how there's less money for musicians involved in the recording process and the selling of music. And one of the things I've observed is that they don't put a lot of money into the music scene either, typically. Most of us are not recording on $1 million Neve console with an engineer in a big expensive room with a bunch of equipment. And, a friend of mine recently did the inventory system for Blackbird Studios in Nashville. There's 10,000 pieces of equipment they had to inventory to be able to pull a different microphone or a preamp from to get the ideal. That's why you go to Blackbird, is because they have such an inventory and a room and a way to use it. But that's simply not what most musicians are paying for. We're recording it on our MacBook Pro with a simple preamplifier, and we're no longer paying for the studio time or the engineer or even the person running to get the coffee, whatever it happens to be. And so there's just less money in the system. And so you've recorded a great deal on your own in a studio I think, what I've just described, something of a powerful laptop and a home sort of studio preamp, although you're much geekier about your gear than the average person is. I suspect you're not recording on a Focusrite Scarlett system.
No,
you probably have
not
something
often.
much nicer than that.
Yeah.
But you get what I'm talking about. And so would you mind sort of comparing the two experiences, the freedom that you have? Okay, I'm going to presume, maybe I should remove my presumption, but I presume that you have a great deal of freedom about working directly with your own studio, where there's no clock ticking, there's no one telling you, hey, this is expensive, that kind of thing, versus recording in the traditional setup where there is a clock ticking and money going. What
It'll be a
world,
complex answer for me personally. So I basically, had a teenage band in the 90s that went in and did recordings and spent what we thought was a lot of money then, and they didn't turn out very good. And at the same time, I realized that my computer could record something. And I'm talking about a computer that had 2 gig of hard drive, pre-USB ports. I used to rent a CD burner to finish projects. A 1/100th the speed of a current iPhone. And so I just worked really hard to start making recordings myself. And for a long time, especially through the 2000s, that was the majority of my income and work was actually being a producer, engineer for other people, not for my own music. So and that involved me working out of my home, working out of professional studios, working in other people's homes or random locations. So it is a different thing. It's kind of so I really enjoy both sides of it, but I so understand what I want. Sometimes it is easier for me to work in my environment and take control a little bit, especially because I'm so particular about how things need to sound. But it's a versus like going into, honestly, all my albums I've pretty much done something on, or the person in the room has been the engineer. Like the players have been the engineers essentially. And so, to be honest, that recording at Studio 606 was the first time in it's the first time ever that I've recorded somewhere and someone else has hit record for my music, where it hasn't been myself or Justin that plays drums with me. We've recorded the last few albums in his studio in LA, but he's the one usually hitting record. He's like from his remotely on an iPad from where he's playing drums, hits record, and then we go. So it was a different experience to focus on those things in that environment, but also we knew it was getting videoed. So it's not just, you're not just recording, you're also going, how am I looking and what's my face? And we also had marks we had to hold for the camera guys. It was a complicated kind of recording, so it's probably not the best thing to do, but as a direct comparison. But there's a certain, this is a long answer, sorry, but we've got time. I want the long answer. Yeah, I think for me as a musician and as an engineer is that, yes, I love having access to the things at home and I own it and I have the gear, but usually when I go to record, I end up taking all my gear somewhere else to record and have a little bit of that pressure of renting a studio and having time and a dedicated thing to go and do a performance rather than trying to spend, days, weeks, months getting the perfect take right. Because I've done that in the past and it's debilitating in the end. Like physically on your playing and emotionally, you just get really down. So I like to put my pressure and go into other places as well.
Yeah. And all right. So the creative process. Now, I know that you, as you've already mentioned, that you really know what you're after to begin with. Is there a benefit as an artist on the creative side to having someone else do that? Yeah, okay, you've already said that you don't really let just someone else do it. So you're never not thinking
I think
about
it depends.
The engineer.
It depends on what your outcome is and how well versed you are in it. For me, making records is as much about the recording process and getting a certain sound for a record as it is the music itself and that sort of thing. I think artists that don't record, who aren't like engineers and aren't recording and have an idea of how the whole thing goes, then yes, someone else coming in is great. And, there are certain people I would dream to work with, but it's kind of hard when you can kind of do it and get the result. It's to then spend that extra money to, as we say, to get, which may not actually translate to more streaming or dollars/cents. It may not work out so well.
Yeah. Yeah, I partly think of it as an experience filter. The idea of working with a producer or an engineer and handing yourself over to them, which is maybe slightly terrifying for some people, but also can be exciting because it's like improv music. You're getting something from the other person's input. I found that whenever I'm a multi-instrumentalist, and I have tried a number of times to record things where I just did everything, and it works. It's okay, but it's always more flat than if I get someone else's input. It's always much more interesting when I don't do everything.
Yeah, and I have that trust with when I get
riding the line of.
Yeah, sorry, man. I think my connection's a bit slow for the back and forth, but
that's okay.
I have that trust with the musicians I work with, and obviously I'm putting a lot of faith in their hands. But I think the recording process for me is just so much fun, and I just love it so much that I just still want to be a part of it at this stage.
Yeah, great. And so you released 2 albums this year. You released your own individual album, the Timing, and the Neumann Sessions. And so I think you're quite prolific. I think you release things quite often. There's a period in time where I remember as a young person being aware that there was just going to be a new album every year from my favorite bands. And when I look retrospectively, those same bands in like the 70s or 60s, if they were recording, they were releasing 2 to 3 albums a year.
Yes,
back at that point in time, many of them. And then, I think the record companies realized they could get more from each album if they just toured the crap out of it for at least a year or more. And then it moved to albums being like 4 years apart sometimes, from major artists. But how often? I get the feeling, anyways, that almost every year I'm looking at a new release from you. Is that about right?
It's not quite. It's been like roughly every 2 years. Where I finally get the time to work on something and put out something new. But it's the release cycle of artists is very different now to obviously what it was years ago with. I think big artists do have that long, expansive time between records because the touring schedule between records is so huge that they've got to do that. And then there's the other side where small artists and, especially relevant to our conversations of like solo acoustic guitar artists release a single every other week in order to, feed the streaming machines and be rewarded by that. So, yeah. But I'm still an album guy. I still like trying to make a project and kind of do that. I've unfortunately still a little bit old school to jump into the release a new song every couple of weeks vibe.
Oh, but do you think of those albums within a particular context? So is that one concept that you're exploring that is separate from the previous concept, and so that releasing them as a collective makes a little more sense? Or is it the headspace to be in, to do them together as a collective? Why do you favor it that way?
It is both things. Usually it's a collection of songs that are from a time period and work in a certain way. And for me, they're exploring some sort of new direction I've got, whether, it's, a musical development thing, whether it's a technique development side of thing of what I'm doing, whether it's a new guitar that inspired me to go a different way for a little while. And it is those project things, and it is that thing, getting back to what we said, even though I have the access to record all day, every day, to some point, I still wait for those magic times to be in an environment where it is inspiring and, be with kind of, I guess, like my recent albums have all been with a trio at least. And so I'm just waiting for those times to be with those people. Like, for example, Timing, we recorded that like September last year, September 2024, depending when this comes out. And we originally were going to have 3 days to kind of track an album in Los Angeles with my band there. And then as life turned out, we got 6 hours just through double bookings, things happening, gigs coming in that people had to do. So we got 6 hours to do it. And I went, okay, well, I'm going to have to pivot what's going on here. And I chose 4 songs that maybe we could get done in that time. And we managed to get through 7, which was extraordinary. Although there were definitely 2 that I thought, even like at the end of the take that I've on the album, I said, oh, that was terrible. Let's just move to the next song. I don't like this. And fortunately, I was then on tour still for another 3 weeks, so I didn't get to listen to any of it for, there was no opportunity for me to actually go back and check out what we'd done. So by the time I got home, I was like, oh, wow, this is actually much better than I thought. There were a couple of happy recording mistakes that happened because we were doing it ourselves. So there was a mic preamp on the electric guitar. So that's what you have a microphone, then you go into a mic preamp, then you go to your recorder kind of thing. And we only had one mic on the electric guitar, so this was it. And it was just really noisy, like sounded like old school tape hiss to the next level. So I had to work with kind of EQ to really manage that hiss down to what I felt was acceptable. And that resulted in a much more mellow guitar tone, actually how I hear it in the room, which was great. And then there was also an issue with one of the drum overhead mics. So it also contributed just to this unique sound of that record. And so I was thinking I would be able to add some recordings with players in Australia and make it an album, but it ended up being such a unique project in itself. I was like, well, there's no way I can add a recording to this. It's just going to sound like a different album. So that's kind of the happy accident of how a project ends up.
Great. So I'll presume then that the title for the album came afterwards?
Yeah. It's all
yeah.
That was just how it worked. That was the timing. Yeah.
That was the timing. Wonderful. Yeah. So I'm thinking back to, as you talk about your different albums going through, I'm thinking back to when we first met, and I'm not sure the date. I mean, this had to have been,
I think it was either like 2008, 2009?
10, somewhere there.
It was before 2010, because that was my first name. We met in Melbourne at one of my favorite cafes, actually.
So I met you on the trip to Melbourne, and then you came to Summer NAMM. See, in my mind, that could have been the other direction. I didn't know that I met you there first, and then then you came to Nashville.
No, actually, it was Winter NAMM. It was 2010 NAMM was the first one I did, and we were working for the same guitar company.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was Cole Clark Guitars back
Yeah.
then, and they have a rather remarkable acoustic pickup system, and so that connected me with a bunch of performing artists like yourself. That's how we met.
Yeah.
And so that's funny. I don't know why I thought it was a summer NAMM show for us,
No.
but you're telling me it wasn't at all.
Nope.
Summer NAMM came a couple of times down the road, did it?
Yeah. That was later.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. And back then, you were really doing solo acoustic
Yeah.
playing, or at least that's the context I met you in. So is that what you were actually doing back at home in Australia, or is that just my context for Adam Miller traveling across the world?
No, that was definitely what I was doing for the most part. And a couple of things, if we talk stylistically. So, I grew up, Tommy Emmanuel was my hero from when I was 10 years old. I got a cassette, like his first real commercial album came out, and I got it within weeks of learning the guitar, of picking up a guitar for the first time. And so, yeah, that was kind of revolutionary, but it was all electric guitar. It was the electric guitar stuff I was really fond of with Tommy. There wasn't as much acoustic stuff on his albums yet. And then fast forward, 10 years, and I'm opening shows for him in Australia and touring with him a bit, which is a whole daunting process. And it was great. Essentially I was, playing solo acoustic guitar. When I would play an electric guitar especially, I just found it was full imposter syndrome. Whenever I picked up an electric guitar, I was always trying to sound like someone else. So I made this decision to really focus on acoustic guitar and not think about what amp I'm using and what pedals I'm using and when I'm going to switch to the bridge pickup versus the neck pickup and all those sorts of things. I was just getting in the way of making music. And, in those early days, I actually had a trio album that was bass, drums, and acoustic guitar. Also because I just didn't feel... I was kind of developing this style that was very influenced by Charlie Hunter, and it was like groove stuff and groove bass lines and improvisation while doing it, and I didn't think I was up to it quite yet to record a solo album. So, I was doing all that sort of thing, and and then actually it was at that first NAMM show in 2010 where I attracted attention from magazines or US magazines and record companies and all sorts of things for the way I play solo guitar. So that was a lot of my work for the next, really till about, I guess it was like 2014 or something, that it was pretty much like when I went on tour, I only had an acoustic guitar with me.
So that's... Okay, so about 5 years in there and longer for you with Australia. That's sort of when I met you. And then the last 10, 11 years at this point in time, it's been more on the electric side, you'd say? You switched?
Yeah. There were...
Carry on.
No. Go.
Oh, well, it's sorry for our listeners having to... me trying to crank up my memory. So Adam and I are very familiar. We're old friends at this point in time. We've seen each other all over the world, and we've worked with each other in a bunch of different contexts. And I don't have a very clear memory on all of the sequence of events of where, I remember conversations in Berlin or in Nashville or apparently in LA and all, all sorts of different places. But there's this, the way that my mind recollects is we were in either Montreal or we were in Berlin, and we had been talking about a number of the boutique guitar makers that now we're both very familiar with that you hadn't had a chance to play yet. And you'd gone through a whole bunch of guitars, and I had seen a bunch of guitars, and we met up. It's like, hey, did you see anything interesting? Did you see anything interesting? We discussed what we sort of saw that day. Yeah. And what's interesting is, you now have relationships with some of those guitar makers that I remember being adjacent to you anyways, as you were discovering for the first time, so I'm thinking about whether it be Nick Huber or Michael Greenfield, that now you have guitars from these guitar makers and such. And so, I guess because many of our listeners are fond of boutique guitars and the work we do with Boutique Guitar Showcase.
Of course.
Do you mind sort of telling me how your side of that with much more detail that I managed to shamefully pull up there a second ago? Nothing. All questions.
There's a couple of things with that. So I guess one, we'll talk about chronological order, because I don't know why I'm really good at remembering this stuff chronologically. I think because it just landmarks different things in my career, especially. But especially with Nick Huber, I was aware of Nick. I actually had a cutout of a review of one of his guitars on my wall for several years, long before that 2010 NAMM show, of the Redwood from Guitar Player. And
Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com.
Then essentially at that show, because we were working together, you introduced me to Nick, and it was quick. I don't know how you felt, but I know at that particular NAMM show, I was pretty much chained to that Cole Clark booth the whole time I was there.
Sure.
Whether I was playing or I was also doing some like international sales work as the Australian representative of the company there. So it was pretty hectic as far as NAMM shows go. I've never had one like that since, fortunately. And so I met Nick quick, but one of the big things was you had one of these Redwoods in your possession, and we were staying at a house in Huntington Beach, maybe, during that NAMM show. And I played that guitar. The day after the NAMM show, it was pouring rain, couldn't go anywhere. I didn't have a car. So I just sat playing this guitar unplugged for maybe 7 hours, like all day long. And so that was kind of my first real, I didn't get to plug it in. The first time I got to plug that guitar in was 7 years later, and it turned up at Rudy's Music in New York, that exact guitar, randomly. So I never plugged it in until that stage. But it was so amazing acoustically to me, and the playability of it, that it was it kind of revolutionized, just how I saw electric guitars, and started really in my development of finding an electric guitar sound that would work for me all the time. So that was kind of like with Nick. Then more on the acoustic side was the Montreal Guitar Show in 2010, which was part of the Montreal Jazz Festival. I went there. I pretty much wanted to see Charlie Hunter play. He was playing at that festival, and I really wanted to see a Ken Parker Archtop in person, and I knew he was displaying his guitars there because I'd heard them in recordings, mainly Charlie Hunter's recordings that Ken had on his website. I don't know when they were made. I'd have to look it up again, but I'd been listening to them. It felt like years at that point. Maybe it was only 6 months, but I really wanted to hear and experience that guitar in real life. So that was a big part of me, just going to that show and starting to meet all those sorts of people. I met Michael Greenfield at that show, Jeff Traugott, and it was an incredible kind of event. So.
Yeah. And so, okay, so that's 2010, and you've owned a couple of Traugott guitars since then at that point.
I have, yeah.
Right.
So,
Got a great
I had a 6-string fan fret acoustic for a number of years, and that was my main acoustic guitar for a very long time. And I still have Charlie Hunter's old 7-string which is kind of a strange 335-ish acoustic guitar hybrid build that Jeff made for Charlie at the time. Yeah, which was actually the guitar that Charlie performed on at that Montreal Guitar Show. Strangely enough.
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Oh, great. Oh, okay. And then, well, I mean, Ken Parker, we're very close to the recent passing of Ken. And, you know, I know you spent quite a bit of time with him. You stayed in his home.
Yeah.
You played that after that 2010 experience. You've had quite a few experiences with those Parker archtops, and from what I recall, even wrote a song, possibly at least one.
I wrote a song called Parker, and that was before all of this. Actually, before I'd ever met anyone, because it was inspired by those first recordings I'd heard so much. Yeah. But yeah,
what was it about these recordings of this guitar that would inspire you to write a song not on the guitar? Take me through that for a second.
Okay, we'll go. I've always had a fascination with archtop acoustic guitars. Like from the first moment, I can't remember. I had the Tony Bacon coffee table guitar books when I was a kid, and they had pictures of DeQuistos and D'Angelicos in them. And I was always like, wow, look, like I was just gravitated towards those guitars. And then, you know, being in Australia, the access that they just don't exist here, especially 25 years ago. So I'd never seen one, never played one. And I bought, like when I was like 19 or 20, I bought a Washburn, probably made in Korea or somewhere, archtop, and it was terrible. But I bought it because it looked like these guitars, and it didn't sound like them at all, unfortunately. And it kind of put me off the whole thing. And then must have been about 5-6 years later, mid-2000s, Martin Taylor was touring with Tommy Emmanuel in Australia. And because I had toured also with Tommy, I was backstage, and Martin was playing a archtop by the builder Mike Vanden. Are you familiar with him at all? Have you ever come across Mike Vanden?
No.
I believe Scottish, but I could be wrong. I can't remember where exactly. When Martin played this guitar in front of me, and it's a small archtop, like 15-inch across, it was like it had that acoustic sound that I imagined those guitars in the photos I saw would have, and it blew my mind. And it was like, wow. And then I think not long after that, somehow, I think these recordings of Charlie turned up somewhere playing Ken Parker's guitars. It was actually the first new archtop he made, and you could just hear the life in the instrument from the recording. And you know, being aware of Charlie's playing, it was the first time I'd heard Charlie play an acoustic guitar and not his, 8-string electric instrument at the time. So it's pretty revolutionary, not just to hear Charlie playing just a normal guitar, but you could hear the bounce and the life in this instrument, and just I don't know, it was revolutionary to me. And I think I went and bought an Eastman archtop not long after that because I was wanting to hear that sound again, but it never was quite there until I eventually got to play one of Ken's, and I'm like, oh wow, this is, and then you realize, oh, it's a whole own thing anyway. But you know, I've just had this affinity with archtop guitars forever, and just so intrigued by the acoustic sound of them, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so let's fast forward now to the point where you do interact with a Parker archtop. So at the 2010 show, I presume you had a chance to play one?
I did get to play
Montreal?
one quickly, yeah. I was pretty nervous. You know, I was, late 20s. I felt very much like a little kid at this thing. No one knows who I am
Okay.
because I have no profile. And so I'm very timid in even asking anyone. I didn't play much at that show. It was only the few people that somehow, I don't know. Anyway, but it was a terrifying experience picking up one of Ken's guitars for the first time with the lightweight of it. And then, when you hit that low E string and it feels like the guitar's going to explode. Literally, it just feels like it's going to fly apart because it's just resonating so much. But yeah, pretty remarkable experience in that. And then, I've pretty much gone close to playing every guitar Ken made then now, just over the years. So I've had a pretty amazing experience in being able to experience those guitars, and had one on loan for a while as well. So
yeah. So can you tell me a bit about when you first started to get some real time with it? So after the late 20s, Adam, who's afraid to
oh yeah
to make this very expensive guitar explode, because that's part of it, right? Like, you're holding this guitar that is worth a lot of money, and
more money than any guitar I'd
so,
played before.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a part of that, and I experience that all the time. It's very normal that the person standing in front of me is holding maybe the most expensive guitar they've ever held in their life because I've put it in their hands. And I'm very familiar with this tentative nervousness of of that. But let's get over that for a second, and let's fast forward to when you can relax and just be Adam now with a Parker for the first time.
I ended up doing a show in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where Ken lived, and I didn't know he lived there. And he turned up where we were staying and just brought his guitar Lucky over and just said, well, I'm just going to leave this with you. And I went, what? Okay. And it was a pretty crazy experience to have that guitar I only had it for a day, I think. And I did perform on it the next night. I performed maybe half my concert on it. And, they're quite revolutionary. The thing, yes, sound amazing. The feel of playing it under your fingers, especially when you're playing fingerstyle and that sort of thing, the amount of effort that goes into the sound that comes out is incredible. And then just the playability of it. It was like the way his neck design works and the way the strings bounced off the fretboard. It just made everything very easy for me. I always found when I played those guitars, I could play things that I couldn't play on other instruments, or would only achieve 10% of the time, but on that guitar I'd achieve 90% of the time.
Yeah, wonderful. And so that moment where Ken drops off the guitar, I'd like to dive into that for a second, or at least touch on it, let's say, because it's a slightly familiar thing to me. This idea of entrusting someone with something where they feel like this is worth too much for you to just sort of abandon with me, for a few moments or whatever, your trust. This is a real sign of trust, sort of an oath, though, it's, and so there's a connection being made in this moment where someone is saying, I trust you with this, enjoy it, have it, please, experience this. And they're projecting value upon you. They're making a clear sign that they value you in some way. And so I'd like to talk about the person of Ken Parker for a moment, because Ken, I think, is an interesting cat. And so without me putting too much into that, how about you tell me, if you wouldn't mind?
Definitely Ken, was the most unique. But in that way, he was incredibly generous. And that was the thing, even with his the Arch Toppery series, which so many people would be familiar with, I guess, probably that listen to this, is that he was always wanting to share information and share the things he's discovered and share his instruments. And he really wanted, he was always sharing his instruments with players. And that was the first and foremost thing. And, I assume there was an expectation if you buy a Ken Parker, you're probably not going to be the first person to play it. It's probably going to go through a couple of players that Ken can find to play the guitar first. But he also had this specific guitar he called Lucky, which he'd also kind of relicked as well, which was his loaner guitar. So it would go to prospective clients for them to check out. He would send it to them if they were interested in buying an instrument. He would loan it to musicians all the time. And he was just super interested in hearing how a musician would respond to an instrument. And I guess, let's be honest, most builders are, but the juxtaposition of the industry is that most musicians can't afford those instruments, that those sort of high-end, incredibly made instruments that would reward them. So, Ken was always just trying to find ways to get them into musicians' hands at sort of any cost, whether it was, basically through having this guitar that he would just loan to anyone, or trying to discover ways that they could be in musicians' hands the same way a Stradivarius violin is in, it goes with an orchestra chair position and that sort of thing. He was always trying to find those ways to, I guess, almost for the instrument to outlive him. Like, I know it's kind of crazy that's, it always seemed that was his goal, that it would live on.
Yeah, that's been a common theme for me in the last couple of years, probably just because of the age that I am and the age of the people in their industry are, is we've been talking about legacy and succession, and even held some gatherings to bring some people together to discuss these topics specifically. And, the modern guitar is within the memory of living people for the most part.
Yeah.
There are, of course, people who have passed by, but there are people who certainly remember the release of a Telecaster. They remember the Les Paul coming to marketplace, or at least when it's very new. Certainly companies like Taylor and PRS and so on and so forth. These are all within living memory for people today. And so I don't think there's been a collective awareness that these instruments are going to live centuries, because it's a relatively new movement. But there's absolutely no reason why these instruments cannot live centuries. They're much more repairable, and stronger built than previous instruments were, for sure. And we certainly have, as you already mentioned, violins and such that are centuries old at this point. Most of them have been modified and cared for in some way, but they still are existing and being played. And so there is a rising consciousness of this idea that at least the most valued instruments will have a life that where it's going to far outlive the person who is currently playing it. And I'm glad of that, actually, because it means that we care for them a little bit differently, that maybe we, take a little more attention to the case it's in, or to how we care for the humidity, or who's doing the repair.
It's in? That depends on who
that.
you are.
Oh, absolutely.
But the rest.
Cases are always that. Yeah. Cases are.
Yeah.
Well, that's something very interesting, because violins have such a low mass that you can actually have a violin in a very light case, and they already know they're valuable, so they don't throw them in the back of a van with an amplifier and a drum set. And we treat them quite differently than we treat. And so I think that's evolving. And we don't need to get into necessarily a case discussion, but just the idea that, is this worth caring for a certain period of time? And even in the vintage world, which I'm not deeply in the vintage world, I'm adjacent to the vintage world, but I have lots of friends who are serious players in the vintage guitar world. And they're very aware right now of who made the repair. Is it documented? Because it's changing the value as these people are passing on. Because we have people who have really large collections worth millions and millions of dollars, who are 80 years old, and there's the discussion of what happens next. And now we come to not just collecting them because you loved the music of whoever, Bill Monroe or Tony Rice or Bob Dylan or Jimmy Page, whatever it happened to be. Now we're talking about what is the actual value for the estate and when it moves on and when it gets sold. So there's this huge discussion going on behind the scenes about the validity of, are these stories true? Was it repaired?
And
Who was
also,
it repaired by? Was it done correctly?
I will say then, and who cares, is actually then the next thing. And who has that sort of money to keep the value in a lot of instruments? And that'll be a really interesting moving forward for, be it vintage guitars, be it the boutique guitar market, is that as people age through, sell guitars, pass and sell guitars and that sort of thing, is that what a younger generation will actually see value in, or how it will be perceived, the value will be perceived of certain things in 10 years time, 20 years time. It'll be really quite fascinating, because it is I find that so many musicians and players, I don't really know many collectors that are like my age or younger, like I'm 45, that are like actual serious collector sort of people. And so, I'm not sure where that future is going to lie. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I agree. I've recently done a bunch of interviews with people who could be perceived as collectors, although some of them, when I called them a collector, they recoiled a little bit and thought about selling off guitars because they didn't like the idea of being a collector. Including a recent interview I did with George Gruen, which when we released relatively close to the time of this recording, the George Gruen episode was released. There was 2 episodes only a week or 2 ago, and George and I have very different perspectives on this, because George is the vintage guy. If you want to talk about an old guitar, you're going to interview George Gruen. If you want to talk about the future of guitar, they call me. And we have a very different opinion on this stuff. Although we have a lot of things we agree upon. But of course, people want to look at the stuff we don't agree upon.
Yeah, of course. And that's definitely...
and how it's valued. And, when you said... who's going to care about that? I just remembered the end of one of the end scenes of one of my favorite films, the Thomas Crown Affair, the version with Pierce Brosnan, that is. And there's this moment where the police detective, and I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but, a very wealthy man steals a painting from the Metropolitan Museum and manages to put it back. And in the end... the police detective says, really, it doesn't matter to me. This guy, wealthy guy, stole a painting, puts it back. The people have their money. They have their painting back. And the only people who really care are a very small amount of very, very silly, very rich people. And that's got to be the perspective of most people. Most people don't even have the ability to even think about whether or not they're going to buy a 1945, a 1930s D45 or something of the sort that's worth hundreds of thousands, or a 59 Les Paul. It's not even a real consideration.
Yeah. And I'm going to be honest, my opinion of that is those guitars have their value in, the almost like the pop culture, music related, musician related icon thing of those eras. But, as instruments, I don't care. It's like, I'm just going to refret it. Like, a 30s Martin, I've played a lot of them that are, they do sound amazing, I will say, but I'm also looking at it going, well, yeah, I've got to refret this. I probably need to put new machine heads on it. I'm probably going to want to put a pickup in it and drill some holes. So where is the value in this? And how long will it last anyway? My perspective is as a performing musician as well. So I'm always thinking about, is this guitar going to be the guitar I take on the road? Usually when I'm looking at a new instrument, it's kind of got to be the thing that would actually make me money a little bit. And I'm not afraid to spend good money on that, but yeah, I would rather go to where I can see the value in the playability, in the longevity, in, certain design things that make an instrument an incredible tool, as well as, beyond that. And I think, there is a younger generation that does see value in the vintage market still, and that same thing. It may always be there where people go, wow, that's a 1952 Tele, I have to have it, even though, really it's not probably a great playing guitar. It's rusty. If the pickups probably do sound pretty amazing, but it's just because the magnets have aged and worn out and that sort of thing. And there's plenty of ways to reproduce that now, I think. But yeah, the other side is that boutique market where a lot of people don't have access to play it. They haven't experienced what the value is in those instruments and what they could get out of them. And that's why they just see a really crazy expensive guitar and don't understand why you would kind of do it for some reason. Well, because they haven't experienced it. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think that is often the case. I think we also need to think about that the expanded possibilities that exist in an instrument that is highly refined are only appreciated when you put them to the test, and not everyone's going to put them to the test. Yeah. And so, there's plenty of people who are very satisfied driving a Ford F-150. It's a very functional vehicle to do what they need it to do, right? And there's lots of people who are likewise driving. Yeah. Listen, when I'm driving in Texas and I hit a traffic jam, it's amazing because in Texas, you hit a traffic jam, all the trucks literally drive off the highway through the ditch up onto the service roads. And I'm in there, my 30-foot RV, wishing I could drive through the ditch and get up onto the service road, but I can't.
Yeah, fair enough.
Nonetheless, so the point is not to judge whether or not the instrument is or isn't good enough for someone. It's to say, is it good enough for you? And you are someone who's always pushing outwards on your own limitations and the limitations of what you can do. And therefore you have come up against limitations within instruments which left you wanting, and this is the most obvious thing that we see in the late 1970s is Eddie Van Halen trying to make a guitar that will do the sound in his head, and just Frankensteining it together on his workbench, and so the awkward part about that conversation, of which I've had thousands of probably, is saying that you may never expose the limitations of a guitar without insulting someone by suggesting that their playing is never going to hit those limitations, or their need for expression is never going to hit those limitations. I don't mean it's better. I really do mean, if you're happy playing a $75 Silvertone that you found at a garage sale, good for you, great. Yeah. But not everyone is. And why should you begrudge the people who are not? Who are pushing against it and who do need something more and who are willing to spend more money than you. I don't see why one person should be labeled good and one should be labeled bad. It's just what is taking care of your needs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but you did say to me a little while ago, I hope it's okay I say this, that you were less interested in commissioning instruments to build, I'm going to interpret a little bit, to build your perceived vision, and more interested these days in just kind of exploring and finding things off the shelf. Did I remember that correctly?
We may have had a private discussion about that, but I'm happy to talk about it. I think it's I think it's hard to just with that current way of ordering and working with builders is the time frame between ordering and getting an instrument is pretty much just too long for an artist. If I'm going to, you know, kind of throw myself into that, it's that hard thing of going, okay, well, right now I think I need this, but you know, I really need to try it next week to know, because then in 6 months' time, it may not exactly be what I need anymore. And it's, I think it's a complex process, and I've found recently I've bought several guitars that I've just played, you know, like I've seen them somewhere, you know, pretty much in a store or one at a show where I'm like, well, this guitar is great, and I would just like this guitar. And so that's how I've kind of, and they've been really inspiring in that way, that I'm just like, okay, this is the new instrument now, it's done, instead of that process of waiting for years.
This space is normally reserved for brands who make stories like this possible, like the Dario and the Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop. If your company belongs in this conversation, let's talk. We partner with brands who value craft, culture, and the quiet power of a well-placed idea.
Now, then at the same time, you know, I did work with Nick Huber on a new guitar, and it was probably a 5-year process. And then I think it was pretty quick when we actually went, it's going to get made. But I think I was so exact about the specs of it and what it had to be that it has exceeded my expectations, you know, with all the little bits. But that's not to say there aren't issues with mine that have now been addressed in production models, but that's now I'm kind of I kind of dig the little things that we maybe didn't discuss pre, and I'm like, oh yeah, we should have done that in hindsight. But that guitar, it kind of grew on me so quickly that it's amazing for me now. So that's just what it is. But you know, it may not be it. That guitar has gone into production, so things on mine that you would see, people would go, oh, that's a bit strange, like the bridge is a little low on mine, and that's been addressed now, but I'm so used to my guitar, it's fine. So it almost, there's a bit of both, but it is very hard as a musician to go, okay, if you know, talk to most builders who, you know, are at least a year out, if not 3, 4, 5.
If they're desirable, yes.
Yeah. 10 years, Isaac Yang. You know, like you just, you just don't know. Like it's really hard to envisage what you're going to need in that time versus what you need now. And having the money to invest in that time is kind of difficult, I think, as well, when you're, trying to still make a living as a musician. But, you know, that's not to say, I think every guitar I've ordered, by the time I've got it, has been great. But they sometimes, you know, there have been things even when I've got the instrument where I went, oh, I should have done this. Just little things where you go, I didn't understand how this would impact me later. You know, one I will talk about is like the fan fret thing, where I'd had a lot of experience playing a Charlie Hunter guitar with 8 strings and a radical fan. So like, what was that? The Novax one I had for years, and it was probably like 25 inches to 29 and like 25 to 29 inches roughly. So a huge 4-inch. And I was really used to playing that and things. And then, so I got an acoustic made, and I did play it for a long time, and it had a fairly radical fan as well. It was 25 to 27 and still tuned standard for the most part. I tuned a drop D sometimes, but you know, I just tuned to standard. And the sound of that instrument was extraordinary. You know, a 00 size. Everyone assumed that I tuned lower just because the resonant tonality of that low E string was incredibly unique. Like it sounded like it was tuned lower. I don't know how, but it really did. It was really special. But what I didn't anticipate was that how much it would hurt my right hand and arm to play. So not my left hand of the fan, but with the way that then your angle is at the bridge, that it ended up very difficult for me I had to twist my hand and my arm in a strange position to get the tone right. So if I, had my hand in a normal position, the bass strings usually sounded pretty good, but the treble strings, I was just playing too close to the bridge saddle because of the fan of the guitar. And then, if I had my fingers in the right position, then my thumb was almost at the end of the fretboard, which was kind of too dull and then didn't bounce. So I was always doing this strange twist with my right arm, and I just couldn't work out why I would do shows and would be really tired at the end. And it kind of occurred to me that was kind of part of the issue. So, but I would never have known that without playing the instrument for, I think, 7 years or something. But it was after a while, I was like, oh, that's, just part of the reality of doing this for me personally.
Yeah, well, so on tour at the Petite Guitar Showcase, I was unaware of that issue until a bass player told me I've always wanted a multi-scale instrument, but I palm mute, and palm muting is a problem for me with a bridge on the angle like that. And so actually on that tour, we had 3 different approaches to multi-scales with the fanning of the frets. And one of them was the dingwall, which fans in both directions, kind of like what you're talking about, I presume. But actually, we also had a guitar maker where the nut was parallel to the and then the bridge fanned. And the other instrument we actually had a bass where the bridge was parallel and it fanned only at the nut side. Well, it fanned towards the nut side. Let's say it had to, not only there, but towards the nut side. So the bridge was actually parallel. And I don't know of any acoustic guitar makers off the top of my head that are taking that approach, but it's possible. It's possible to do that.
It is possible. It depends
where you
on
straighten up the bridge a little more.
Yeah, it depends on how radical your fan is. Like a 1/2 inch sort of, differential in your scale length, you could theoretically have a straight nut or a straight bridge, because you're only, at either end, you're only going that far. My guitar, also because I was like, I didn't really see the point in fanning the fret unless it was radical, to be honest. So, 2 inches, you've got to then start to think about, okay, where does the perpendicular fret have to be to make playability right? And I'd already worked that out, that it had to really be at the 7th fret, because that's kind of the midpoint of the neck beyond the body. And you had to that was where I could still play fairly naturally through the majority of the guitar. There'd be a little bit of radical things at the nut. But yes, if I'd put it at the 5th fret to make the nut less than the bridges more, then I would have had more of an issue than I already had. If I'd put it at the 9th fret to get a straighter bridge, then the nut would have been crazy and I couldn't play an F chord with my thumb anymore, because it's like a double jointed sort of thing. But it's all a compromise. It was an interesting kind of process to kind of come up with that. But I was very versed in fan frets at the time. I was all about that design thing and that being and I think a lot of the builders were, especially at that first Montreal guitar show, that so many of the guitars were fan fret, and that was my first experience with good guitars. And I thought a lot of what I was hearing was the fan fret and not actually just the build of things.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm on a bit of a mission to get rid of this fan fret terminology.
Sure.
It's okay. It's okay to use it. It's fine. we're going to challenge each other right now, Adam. Okay. It's okay. Yeah. Really, for me, it's about being multi-scale, and therefore, when we talk about, it needs to be extreme or else what's the point, is I don't think that it needs to be extreme. I think that it needs to be right. And that if we're talking about it as multi-scale, we're talking about basically the Pythagorean sort of observation of the string at a particular length and thickness at a tension always produces the same note. And so what is the ideal length of the string to produce that tone? And that's not necessarily the most extreme fanning in either direction. So do you think that an E actually requires a 37-inch scale to sound equally in tone or balanced across?
Okay.
Because I think that's maybe a little farther than it needs to be to produce an equal timbre and tension.
Yeah, the 27 that I had on my guitar. Here's my current opinion, is that it's actually entirely useless. And it where I have issues with the multi-scale is that you end up with intonation, not inaccuracies. They may be more accurate as far as the way intonation goes, but it's very hard for it to tune to where it sounds in tune to you, depending on your ear. I had a lot of trouble with them actually sounding in tune to the way I interpreted relative pitch, if that makes sense. So like when I'm playing a chord, I would spend forever, especially fine tuning the B and E strings to get them kind of just right so that I could hear a chord in tune. Whereas when I play a straight fret guitar, even though they're out of tune, all the time, no matter how good your intonation is, how new your strings are, it was easier. It's always been easier for me to find a tuning that I'm happier with. And unless you're doing extended range instruments, and I mean like the things that Charlie Hunter plays, I don't know. I find it there's more complications with having it than necessary from the point of view of tuning the thing, bracing and top stability if we're talking an acoustic guitar, and then even fret wear and fret buzz when you don't have your strings on a perpendicular, when they're actually going across a fret on an angle. I experience unusual fret buzzes where I wouldn't have them in other guitars because of those angles. But this is my experience of
and they're using
playing
a standard size sort of fret.
Yeah. Oh, actually, on my acoustic, I had kind of a small acoustic sort of fret, like I don't even know, just a standard acoustic fret. I can't think of even what it is. Then I actually put jumbo, like fairly big, so like 6105. They might have even been wider on that instrument, and that had bigger issues, to be honest, because of the surface area across the fret. And I had that particular guitar refretted, I think 3 or 4 times in the time I had it.
So there are multi-scale. So the person who's done the most work, and it's not an acoustic guitar, it's a bass, the Dingwall basses. The Leland Sklar Dingwall signature bass has mandolin frets in it.
Yeah.
And actually, Dingwall basses have very narrow, skinny frets on many of them, banjo frets or mandolin frets. And so that's interesting. It never occurred to me until you were talking about it that this fret being at an angle as opposed to simply perpendicular to the string would mean that the string is interacting with more surface of the fret because of the angle. And so... and then how well it's crowned, I guess, at that point in time as well. And then so,
as you, very slight vibrato, you're changing exactly where it is. And so fret wear becomes strange. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to kind of consider if you're playing a guitar a lot.
Yeah. So my take on this has simply been from the design and manufacturing part of the guitar is that the only reason that we even have parallel frets at all is simply an outdated manufacturing technique of a box saw that arrived from there being nylon or gut strings wrapped around a neck at one point in time, which just found themselves perpendicular because of the neck shape at one point. That it was the multi-scale instrument is actually the oldest style of instruments where we just had different length strings and different thickness of strings. And the idea of putting a parallel nut and saddle on and having parallel frets is just simply an out-of-date engineering technique with a box saw.
Yes.
And so it was never the right solution. It was just a solution.
Yeah.
And so I do still think that if we're simply chasing the sound and intonation of the instrument, that we would not end up with parallel frets. And since we no longer cut frets with a box saw primarily, I think that the parallel fret will eventually disappear, except for instruments in which we're making a historical reenactment.
Ooh.
I don't mean in 10 years. But I mean, in maybe 200 years, I think that the only ones that will make a parallel fret is just those who are reenacting a time period and are more happy to do the romance and reenactment side than it is to do the engineering side of it.
Who was still making 1930s Martins and 52 tellies.
We don't make 52 tellies with the frets that they had.
Well,
Even Fender doesn't put those ridiculously flat frets on them.
But yeah, it's hard because it's,
and they don't ship with, what was that, 15?
Exactly.
Like the strings were really, they came from acoustic guitars and archtops on those early tellies. They don't ship with those strings either.
You couldn't draw a wire that thin yet. Like the thinnest wire you could draw was I don't know inches, but essentially what ends up being 16, 15 gauge. Yeah, you couldn't get down to 11 or 10. So, I think it depends on how and I just kind of pooed on vintage guitars a little bit, and the connection to music. But for me, because I'm listening to music and reproducing things, I'm so used to hearing the guitar as an out of tune instrument that it's really hard for me to, and I'm saying like a lot of the multi-scale instruments, Jamie, more...
Which have frets that are fanned. That's okay.
Yeah. Because, if we get into the technicality of, especially when Ralph Novak started introducing it, is that he fanned it because his way of laying out the frets had a disappearing point and it all came off one point, whereas most people now actually draw two scale lengths along the string line. Which is a very important thing instead of along the edge of the fretboard, because then your lengths are all wrong. However, I'm just so used to, for me personally, hearing the way a guitar is out of tune that it's, and I don't feel like anyone really hears it except for perfect pitch keyboard playery types that, when I'm doing sessions make me want to retune for each chord, which has happened, but that's a thing as well.
Yeah. At a certain point in time, we get into this sort of matrixy moment where the character of Smith talks to the Neo character and says, we've actually designed the Matrix. I don't remember how many times. Like, this is X iteration of the Matrix, and the problem is we made it too perfect, and your kind couldn't take the perfect.
Yes,
we had to make it disease and fester a little bit in order for you to feel okay with it. And it reminds me when someone sort of pursues this real perfection in making a musical instrument, and my brain always goes, yeah, you can make it absolutely perfect, but it'll never sound right if you play honky tonk on that piano. And we need a certain amount of that dissonance sometimes in that instrument for authenticity. And perfect isn't always what we want. I am very willing to pay really good money for an amazing meal and be very satisfied, but I'm also really happy with a $3 hot dog at the side of the road if it's done right.
Yeah. And the idea of perfect is that same thing. It's like, is it perfect for you? And what you kind of want to create, I certainly don't have any guitars that are perfect. And would I want them perfect? Not necessarily. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I want to address something you said a moment ago, where you talked about extended range instruments. And this is another thing, I spent a great deal of time thinking about the sort of unwritten future of guitar and talking on it and exploring it conceptually. And I am more and more convinced that the 6-string and guitar and its relative 5-string bass are a time period, and that we're definitely moving towards what we now call extended range guitar just being kind of the normal guitar. And we did go from 5-chord to 6-chord in the guitar also. Well, the current iteration that we talk about has been around really since about the mid-1800s. So we're about 150 years into the current sort of 6-string standard, if you will. And one of the things that I think you're particularly apt to answer with this is I think we're going lower in the musical instrument because of our ability to actually do it clearly. The fidelity has expanded from recording to the reproducing of the sound, which didn't previously exist. We didn't have amplifiers that would do it. We didn't have mics that would pick it up. We didn't have speakers. We didn't have consoles that could handle the the lower frequencies. The records couldn't go to certain frequencies, at a certain time period. And so, during your and my lifetime, you probably have a memory of being the first time in a movie theater when THX came on the screen and they did this big bass drop, and we all went, "Oh my God!" Right? Yeah, totally. What is that? Yeah. And the same thing with the upper register. There's a higher fidelity there that we expect, and I'm gonna try and put in two concepts here where we talk about going lower and about going higher, because your experience where you mentioned Tommy Emmanuel as an electric player, I think a lot of people realize that Tommy was first. Electric player who went to acoustic. And I think many people did that, actually. Many of the current modern fingerstyle gymnastics kind of players were electric players who went to acoustic guitar or returned, let's say. And that when you do so, in your mind, you have an expectation of how a string can respond, the fidelity in which you can pull from a guitar string. That when I first started interacting with acoustic guitars, a young teenager, so I was already playing electric guitar. They were laborsome to play. They always sounded a little bit plunky. They didn't have the high-end fidelity because I was into hard rock and metal, so I false harmonics was a thing I liked to do all the time. So I had an idea of a high-end frequency and harmonic response. And so what do you think the effects are that correlate with the development in fidelity in recording and the reproduction of music as it relates to the player's expectation and the evolution of the instrument?
I definitely agree with that. The lower side of things, like it is the reproduction of it that gives you the ability to play it. Like, do you remember? I remember like being in high school and people were like, you can't play the bass through the guitar amp. You couldn't possibly do that. It'll blow up the speakers. But now, I'd be fine to play my bass through most of my guitar amps, like just as a sound, because it will handle it. And then, especially I've seen through, great friends, especially notably like Ariel Posen and Joey Landreth, like the baritone guitar just sort of take off so big where you're tuning to like, open C or like B standard for the most part and that sort of thing. So it really is in the middle. And, all my amplifiers and speakers handle that fine. I have no concern just playing those instruments like that. And I'm not sure where it goes, but I definitely know it's perceived as a cool thing at the moment as well. I know, the baritone guitar that I play is a Mule solid body resonator, and I have it kind of permanently set up in usually B or C standard and it's a 25-inch scale. It's not a baritone length. I have it. What do I have it with? 14 to 64 gauge strings. So it kind of is like pretty much like a set of 11 electric strings with a low, an extra low one. And I know whenever I play that, people are like, whoa, what is that sound? And I think it just is, as much as you can reproduce it, and maybe that's why more people are doing it. It definitely is a cool thing. It's always a thing that people go, even if I'm playing for other artists as well, they're like, oh, can you use that guitar in more songs? And I'm like, well, it's a little hard because the key doesn't work to get that, it really only has 4 extra low notes in reality. But, it definitely is a kind of cool thing. I'm not sure about bass. I have my own feelings of bass. I don't really like hearing a bass go below E. If I'm playing with someone, there's only a very few people I will let get away if they turn up with a 5-string. I'll probably ask them to leave. But that's me as a musician and artist, but that's fine. But then on the other side, like the acoustic thing and, the high end fidelity, like that's a whole nother world. And I'll jump back to much earlier in our conversation actually, was that was a huge thing of turning me to electric guitar, funnily enough, was that I was, I'd been playing pretty much exclusively acoustic guitar as myself. I still did a lot of electric work playing for other artists, but when I was Adam Miller, I was playing acoustic, and but I was having nightmares on the road. I can't afford to tour with my own sound guy or any of those things, so I was just having a lot of issues translating the guitar sound to front of house engineers. Just please do not cut all the bass out. Please do not add treble. Please do not add compression, because we're just going to have issues. And I did this in-store tour for 2 Rock amplifiers through Europe. And because it was for that, I had to take an electric guitar. This was like when I just released a solo acoustic album that kind of blew up. And I was blown away because every night I had the best sound ever because I was just playing through a guitar amp and it sounded great. And if there was a front of house guy, they'd put a mic in front of it and they'd just turn it up louder. And it would really have probably too much bottom end. But that was great. It was better to have too much bottom end than not. So that was kind of my experience going back the opposite way. And it was just a way for me to deal with my own expectations on tour. But, I guess the reproduction of acoustic guitar is a strange beast that we can talk about for hours as well.
Yeah, it's kind of where we met, isn't it?
Yeah,
in this sort of chase at some point in time. And it's still a challenge. As a matter of fact, I hear certain instruments that have been released in modern day, and I don't have a problem talking about it. I'm not trying to slander anything here, but when I hear something like a Fender Acoustasonic, whatever it is, that thing they released with the, I'm just like, if I just heard that, I just don't want to make those sounds. I don't. I don't understand. Like, do I want to sound like an acoustic guitar? Yes, there's something pleasing and rich about it. Electric guitars, likewise. This thing. And I think I'm a very open mind on what a guitar can be and what a guitar can sound like. But this sort of harsh piezo quacky sort of thing that has no sensitivity when you play it lightly, and then when you hit it too hard, it kind of barks in your ear, in an unpleasant way. Like, I think that it's one of these scenarios where we've gone down this path and committed to the technology, and the technology sort of shapes where we're going with it from here. But if we remembered that we were trying to make an acoustic guitar louder, we wouldn't be trying to do it this way.
Yeah. Well,
and I don't know there's a better solution yet, but I think that we need to constantly remind ourselves to say we got to keep looking, because this is not a great answer.
Yeah. My constant joke, slightly serious thing is that the best, acoustic guitar pickup that was designed to play acoustic guitar or guitar loud was the Fender Telecaster. If you had to play loud, then you played that guitar. There wasn't the differentiation between electric guitar and acoustic guitar at the time. It was like or I
Right.
just need to be able to be heard playing a guitar. So this is what I'm going to play.
Yes.
And I think everyone kind of forgets that. But yeah, and you know, a lot of that too, that quacky, plucky, compressed acoustic guitar sound, and this was the issue I was having on tour, was that is what people expect to hear from an acoustic guitar live. That is kind of the industry standard, especially, you know, I will say in the US and like North America, maybe Canada as well, because that is the way people have heard acoustic guitars for so long, reproduced live. Is that's the sound, is that when I turned up with, you know, probably starting with my Cole Clark guitar that had, you know, multiple pickups in it. I also had like DPA microphones all crossed over, you know, it very well reproduced the acoustic sound of the guitar across an entire spectrum, that when they heard that, they were like, whoa, that's a little volatile. Whereas, you know, I'd worked out ways to control it and make it work the whole night. But, you know, it's just that same thing again. People get used to a certain sound and expectation of what an instrument sounds like. Especially even live. Yeah.
As a guitar builder and a player, you have a sense for when something's working right. That's why so many of the world's best trust D'Addario. Unmatched tone, perfect intonation, and strings made to the tightest tolerances in the industry. That reputation is no accident. It's the result of 400 years of being obsessed with quality and innovation. D'Addario. When you know, you know. Yeah. I remember taking those Cole Clark guitars to the Station Inn in Nashville and having to work with the engineer to say, don't do that thing that you immediately do when you see an acoustic guitar. Because every engineer in Nashville knows they just hit this EQ curve because that's what they do every night. And before you even try it, it's never tried flat. They just preempt it. They shape it ahead of time. And thankfully, I was there with Randy Coors, who's a respected engineer and producer, and Randy convinced them not to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they went, wow, what is that sound? But it really was predetermined that it was going to be in that direction. And so that brings us in an interesting direction, which I'd love to talk with you about, because some of our listeners might not have caught it, but you specified where those sounds are, because actually the Australian market, because of its geography from being basically a Western culture placed squarely in Southeast Asia, almost, not really, but, you know, effectively, your closest land masses, they've been very isolated as a culture, and it developed in a very different way, which I think is wonderful. It's something that in the modern age we kind of miss. We don't have this sort of petri dish sort of development or fermenting of a local culture the way that we did. You know, the Motown sound that developed, the Detroit sound that developed, that was different than the Memphis sound, that was different than the Chicago sound, is simply because we couldn't get the sound further than that at one point. And Australia developed what I think is a very unique guitar culture, but also a specific instrument making culture that's around the acoustic guitar, and a slightly different approach to acoustic pickups, which means every artist that I've ever dealt with from Australia has a different expectation for what acoustic guitar sound is. Now, admittedly, I was interacting with acoustic guitar players from Australia primarily, because of the company I was working with. But I saw it over and over and over again, that there was just a different, because the technology was different, the response was different, and people played acoustic guitar differently. In many ways, from the fact that, one, you get a more natural acoustic sound from it than the sounds that we were just describing, both from Maton and from Cole Clark and maybe others. And then furthermore, there's this synthesis crossover moment that happens with many Australian guitar players, where there's not a hard party division between the acoustic guitar and the electric guitar. I know many Australians who play acoustic guitars fully distorted and dual outputs in different experimental kind of ways than what I see in other parts of the world. So I've set you up with my sort of perception, but, you know, I'm a foreigner talking to
Yeah.
one of the natives. So, Adam,
Yeah.
how do you
Well, it was, I think,
just
so
respond.
much of this was led by Tommy Emmanuel, I feel, to be honest. Like it was him, being well known in Australia. And yes, I did speak about him, his albums being electric guitar, but he definitely did play acoustic and did play like solo acoustic guitar in pubs around Sydney and Melbourne and that sort of thing. Like it still happened. And obviously he was chasing this very big, I want to sound like the full band sound. And I want my guitar to be able to deliver these things and not feed back. And it kind of developed my understanding originally through the Australian distributor of Takamine. Designed a pickup, which is this palithetic pickup, which is 6 piezo crystals that go through the top of the bridge. And so the result is that it's almost a combination of what you get from an undersaddle and a soundboard transducer. And it's so it's a very big, expansive sound just with that alone. And I think just because of, Tommy Emmanuel, especially through the 90s, was like just a household name. It wasn't like in guitar circles. It's like everyone, if you were from another country, you might go think of a guitar player and they might say Eric Clapton. In Australia, they would say Tommy Emmanuel because he was just on all the, the Tonight shows and things every week. He was in McDonald's commercials. Like it was just, he was, mainstream media almost. His albums would go to top 5 in the pop charts when they were released. And so that was kind of the standard of acoustic guitar playing. And so everyone was kind of chasing that. And then I think also because our music culture is so like the Aussie rock sort of thing, which, would go back to, for international audiences like AC/DC and that sort of thing. And then as music changed and, you couldn't have a band in the corner of a pub anymore and you had to be a soloist playing guitar, is that you still needed to sound like a full band. And so everyone was just trying ways to make their guitar sound big and huge and loud. And, I've still never played shows as loud as I've played in pubs in Australia playing acoustic guitar. Like, if my guitar behaved and didn't feed back at one of my local gigs, it would be fine in most places if the sound engineer listened to me. But yeah, it resulted in these very unique pickup systems and also just what the industry standard was because, Maton and then eventually Cole Clark were just what everyone went and bought. Martins and Taylors were still double the price because they were being imported to the country. And so, yeah, that was what just everyone aspired to. So that was the standard, to have this pickup system that sounded bigger and fuller and more bottom end. And, when you heard other pickup systems from other companies, you couldn't understand why anyone in the world would be using those things. But that was just, that's just the industry standard in Australia. And I think because of that pub culture of trying to get over the top of people weren't actively ever listening, it wasn't, and that was my experience growing up as well, is that literally the first time I ever played a solo guitar concert was opening for Tommy Emmanuel. I'd never played solo guitar anywhere before that. There wasn't a cafe scene or something for me to play. It was just rock gigs. I'd played a ton of rock gigs, but I'd never played solo guitar anywhere before that, except maybe at a high school concert for a song. And yeah, it just, developed all those different things. Whereas, obviously Tommy Emmanuel, we've got, I think of like John Butler, who famously uses a Maton, but pretty much he does play with the pickup into the PA, but then he's also used a Seymour Duncan mag mic in the sound hole feeding a Marshall forever. So he's got both things going all the time to create this huge sound. And
12-string often, if I recall. Is it a 12-string guitar or a 6?
It was, definitely in the early days, it was always a 12-string without the high G because they would just break anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, that was his thing. They was, especially John Butler was so hugely popular in Australia, then, you know, that spawned off all these people doing that sort of thing. And, but yeah, I think that instrument culture and those designs, especially in Australia, changes, your perspective of how you go about things. And, it was just that industry standard thing. It was like the industry standard acoustic guitar sound was a Maton, not a Fishman pickup in a guitar.
Mm-hmm. Mm. You know, that's an interesting part of what you said there a moment ago was about trying to sound like the full band without having the full band. And that sheds a new light when I think about artists like Xavier Rudd, he still brings the full band setup, just surrounds himself with it, you know, where he's playing multiple things at the same time, or at least was the last time I heard him. I don't know what he's doing today, sorry. But, or even someone like Lloyd Spiegel, who is just, you know, using the guitar percussively, but not like in a fingerstyle gymnastics kind of way. You know, he taps the bridge and has a stomp board all the time, you know, as sort of the bass drum, and just sort of filling out that space is something I associate when I think of Australian guitar players. I don't think of someone just playing guitar. I don't know. That sounds weird. That's a bad way of saying it. You know,
definitely you're right.
Like they're always trying to be something more somehow.
Yeah. And I think Australian culture has definitely created that. Also, the fact that we are, a huge country, and so touring with a band, you you just can't drive. You've got to drive somewhere for 10 hours to get to the next major city, and to, you know, take a band with you to do that is just kind of too hard. So it was that reality of trying to do that. And then pretty much you have to end up going overseas at some point if you're serious. And then if you're trying to take a band, that's way too hard. So yeah, you're always trying to find ways to kind of do things yourself a little bit. And, you know, that musician culture as well, I would say here, you know, like there aren't session musicians as much. There aren't touring musicians. It's a very small number because we don't have artists that go around and do 50 dates. You know, an Australian tour for like a, you know, like even a high level country artist in Australia might be, 20 dates, but they're just on the weekends over, you know, over 10 weeks. It's not like
a long tour. Yeah.
But it's not like they go out on the road for the time, because we just don't have that population or infrastructure to do that. So, ultimately, if you're wanting to make a career as a musician and you want to do it yourself, at some point you really have to. I feel like most people end up having to play solo to some extent, and then they're trying to really create it as big as they can.
Well, that's interesting, because I also think about people like Ben Harper and Jack Johnson, who both broke the Australian market before their home markets. They both became famous in Australia before they became famous in the rest of the world, if I'm recalling this correctly. And when I think about, certainly Ben Harper's playing is in the direction of what you might get from what we're talking about in Australia. And then even Jack Johnson, who's a more simple guitar player, still Jack is trying to sound like the drums, like the rhythm section with the acoustic guitar through his constant sort of down click into the strings and such of what he's doing. And I wonder if the Australian community was just more already warmed up for that sort of concept to take it up before others were.
Yeah, I think so.
Am I taking it too far?
No. I think, and there was a huge, these festivals still exist, but it was in its infancy, the Byron Bay Blues and Roots Festival. And that was like those guys both kind of did very early on and projected them in a certain way. But yeah, they definitely had that. And then obviously both early on gravitated to those Australian guitars as well. They were both playing Matons and then Cole Clarks and that sort of thing, because they found that those sounds and that, you know, work to create that, what they were trying to do. Sorry, lost my train of thought with good words.
Yeah. That's all right. So that's, you know, it's interesting to me because it never occurred to me that them being going to Australia and then finding instruments that actually better suited the styles that they were trying to accomplish, even though they're both from the U.S. I think Hawaii and California, if I remember correctly, those two artists. They found instruments and an instrument culture which might be more akin to what they were doing, at least in that moment. And then, I think about how that came back to the U.S. and some of the time that you and I have even spent together in Nashville was because of a guitar that was developed for Ben Harper, this cross between a Weissenborn and an ES-335. This, again, trying to do more out of one instrument, right?
Yeah.
The Violap that Cole Clark was making. I don't know if they're still making it at this point. It's come in and out of production over the years. But when I brought it to North America, it was all of the top dobro players and slide players in Nashville were all over this thing. And next thing you know, I was working with Jerry Douglas and Bruce Boughton and a bunch of the players there. And I wasn't really that aware of what they were doing ahead of time. My parents listened to a lot of country music. I grew up on country music. I felt like I was being punished by it when I was young. I enjoy it now. But I wanted to hear Iron Maiden and Ozzy Osbourne, and my mother was... And this was the worst period in country music. This was sort of the Rhinestone Cowboy sort of period of country music, right? Yeah. During this period. And so I enjoy much older country music, basically at this point, when it was sort of more of a root sort of music. Anyways, it was interesting to sort of come in there and then even there expand the possibilities. Because when I started working with Jerry Douglas with the Violap, he really saw it as another sort of... He played it the same way he played his resophonic guitar, to like his square neck dobro. And or Beard, pardon me, Paul Beard, his square neck Paul Beard guitar. And then I told him about the dual output. He said he never used the humbuckers. He said, I tell you what, just get yourself like a little Blackface Deluxe, turn the gain up to the point where it's going to get some hair on it, but put a volume pedal in there. And don't do anything else. Just play what you're doing. And every once in a while, should you feel inspired, just lean into that volume pedal for a second and let it come up behind your acoustic sound. And then I got a message from him saying that he had done this at the Elvis Costello rehearsal, because Elvis Costello did a couple of Americana albums during this period, and that it inspired a whole new set within the Elvis Costello show, where Elvis Costello pulled out now a tenor guitar, a 4-string tenor he had, and Jerry leaned into the distortion, and they got all sort of experimental for this, like 3 or 4 songs in the middle of the set. Sorry to all the Elvis Costello fans who might have hated that particular moment of the show. Where it got a little weird. For my implications in that. But it's amazing that even when you have these really incredible there's very few musicians in the world to ever achieve the level of a Jerry Douglas, as a player. But to sort of give them a tool which allows them to expand their sonic possibilities, and they go somewhere they had never thought to go. That's one of the things I love the most about my work in the guitar, is just giving people possibilities to explore and do something they might not have done before. Because I find it really gratifying to do things I've never... We're adventurers. You're an adventurer too. We're world travelers and looking for new experiences.
It is that idea of like trying to find, that was the big thing, especially with electric guitars. For me, I was always looking for an electric guitar that didn't personify the instrument, because I was the guy that would play a Strat like a Strat. I would instantly gravitate to playing like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Clapton. And if I picked up a 335, I'd be trying to play like Larry Carlton or whatever. And I was always looking for instruments where I could remove that and just kind of play the guitar instead of where I didn't have a preconceived idea of what this guitar could do or couldn't do. And I think that's a really cool thing that a lot of people miss, because most people are chasing the sound of their heroes and that sort of thing. But, if we... relate this back to this whole boutique guitar world, when you've got guitars that, do a sound that didn't ever exist before, it's kind of really interesting, whether that is an acoustic instrument or an electric instrument, or, as we're just speaking, the strange hybrid of the two almost, the gray area.
So why did you do that? That's a very metacognitive approach. I mean, you have to be very conscious of what you're thinking and why you're thinking it to want to go in that direction. And so you just said, I'll paraphrase, at least you certainly implied that most people are chasing something that already exists, right? So you see a particular guitar and then you play the songs from the songbook that you associate with that particular image and that guitar. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So why did you have this sort of impulse to not be bound to the icon of that particular guitar?
So it was that thing of, because whenever I picked up an electric guitar, I personified that guitar. When I picked up an acoustic guitar, I tended to not do that. It was a blank canvas. And, I was playing I had a range of guitars. I had a bunch of Maitons. Well, I had 2 Maitons, not a bunch, from when I was like a late teenager. And then I got a Martin John Mayer signature model because I did love John Mayer, but I also liked that particular spec of that guitar. But I was never trying to play them and then eventually a Cole Clark. But it was always just this idea of, I just treated them as a blank canvas, even though, I wasn't trying to go for a certain sound. And I don't think you really do with acoustic guitar. Maybe some people do, but when I started really getting back into the electric guitar, it was this idea of I really want it to be this blank canvas. And I had ordered a guitar that was very similar to a guitar that Robin Ford used to play at the time. And I got it and it never really worked for me. I was like, this doesn't, my experience with ordering guitars again, it just doesn't achieve these, the ideas that I thought it would do, and I'm fighting it. And so I actually built my own guitar from parts then. I built a thin line Telecaster with a solid rosewood neck. And I'd had a lot of issues with single coil noise at shows. So I put a Firebird humbucker in the neck of that guitar, mini humbucker. And the Firebird is a unique mini humbucker because it's almost like, imagine 2 Tele neck pickups joined together as a humbucker, and the magnet in it is a Alnico rail. So the magnet is still very close to the string, whereas a regular humbucker, the magnet is at the base and there are slugs going up through it. So you get that direct response of the string to the magnet like you do with a Strat pickup. So I specifically wanted that feel. And with that guitar, it really became this idea, even though it was a Tele, it really had this unique blank canvas sort of sound, and it really then set me down that path. And then working with my first guitar with Nick Huber, which was, the Rietbergen, but I just saw it as a giant Tele made of the woods same woods as the guitar I'd had posted on my wall long before I met him. And then, I put gold foil pickups in it because I'd been really intrigued by the range of their sound. So talking, the dynamic range and the frequency range. They had more bass and more treble than most pickups. And so I really liked that idea of that it was almost getting back to being acoustic sounding and that kind of, blank canvas of things. So, and it just allowed me to then create music free of trying to sound like anyone else. I wasn't thinking about what pedals or things I was using anymore. I treated the guitar like an acoustic instrument, essentially. That's kind of what's happened,
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm getting a little too, want to get into the psychological profile here, but I really want to, do you have an awareness as to why you should care to not be bound by those icons? I mean, besides musical expression, I mean, there's a lot of musicians who feel it's easier just to sort of toe the party line and do those things you're supposed to do. And it seems like it's harder to carve out your own space, and I think it is. But the thing is, you'll never achieve those sort of the highest levels by just sounding like someone else. And so it's it's this leap that an artist has to be willing to make to not just be a utility that's usable by other artists when they want to get this sound, but then to become the sound that others are wanting to be. And I don't think you're necessarily trying to be the hero, but you know what I mean? Like I remember I spent a bit of time with Marcus Miller, and a musician had talked to me just before then. And I said to Marcus, that this player, he's really good. He's really great. And he's playing for top musicians all over the world, but he just can't get to the next level. He's like, yeah, he can't get to the point where other players are trying to sound like him. And of course, Marcus Miller can say this because there's a lot of people who are trying to sound like,
of course,
Marcus Miller, and we all know what that, well, not everyone knows, but many people know what the sound of Marcus Miller is. And so, but I guess there's a greater risk of failure to try and be your own thing. And so, are you conscious of that? Or were you just so obsessed with your own vision you weren't really thinking about it? Or
not to that point, but for me, it was always like going back to the earliest days of things. And yes, I grew up listening to Tommy Emmanuel's instrumental music. I loved it because I heard it when I was 10 years old, and I couldn't sing along to Billy Joel yet because my voice hadn't broken. But in my head, I sounded the exact same as Tommy Emmanuel playing along to him. And so I just developed this love of instrumental music. And I think forever I've been told I can't do that. I have to sing, which is, so there's always been this little bit of defiance. And, if I'm being honest, I can sing fine, but I can't sing anywhere near as good as I play guitar, like not even in the ballpark. So there's and I don't write anything in that way either. And so it was just that pursuit of, yes, wanting to be unique, wanting to not be, for me personally, not wanting to be compared to Tommy Emmanuel my whole life is one thing, which is, definitely when you're an Australian solo guitar player, that's obviously the first thing, and it's great, but I didn't want to be, that was very early on for me that I, wasn't playing that same sort of repertoire and music or even the technical style of that. And it was like part of that thing of the uniqueness. And as you start to compose and write, is that you just realize all these sounds don't actually work for what you're trying to achieve. And that's part of the goal, is that to achieve this sound and to achieve this like picture of your music, I was just chasing something that was different. And it definitely does always relate back to that acoustic guitar idea and having more, even when I play electric guitar, I probably play with too much bass. I'm constantly in the bass player's way, probably, but they're my band, so they have to deal with it. But I wanted this expansive sort of thing. It's almost, and I thought about it a few years ago again, I realized how much I loved like the early albums of Ben Folds 5. And I love that idea of like drums and bass and the piano playing like all these parts underneath stuff. And even, different lines, but no one ever really did that with guitar, in a band. Then it was just chords or as a melody on top. And I think that was part of like kind of the inspiration of trying to treat the guitar like the piano in an ensemble and finding, guitars that would have that sort of identity and allow me to create that sort of thing, but also function live. I definitely tried to use arch tops, and because I do love them so much, but there would always be the point where it takes off and feeds back and I can't actually use that anymore. And then the same with playing acoustic guitar live is that no matter how good I've got a pickup system sounding, and a lot of my guitars have pickups that I've created and put together now because I've spent so long with different systems. There was always a point where it just hit kind of threshold and the volume was too much, or it was just kind of a little bit too brittle or the pickup couldn't actually handle the dynamic range of the incredible acoustic guitar it was in. So it was actually overdriving everything. And so, I was just always trying to find this acoustic balance with my electric guitars to, achieve that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Adam, as we come to a close in this conversation, I always like to throw it back to my guest and say, is there a topic today or a question that you had hoped we might discuss that maybe I've failed to address at this point, or something you let that last ones to you?
Well, Jamie, what would you hope to see out of the boutique guitar industry out of the next 10 years? And like, where do you see the compromise in development versus the retail, like the reality, the business reality of that market going?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, I think we need to define boutique. And so for me, boutique is the uncompromised vision. And so I work with companies like Strandberg and Dingwall, people who make guitars at high volumes. But, well, actually, it goes back to one of your early statements about working with a boutique guitar maker as a professional musician, that there's a challenge when someone's very popular and has a 4, 5, 10-year lead time, whatever it happens to be, and you having immediate needs. And so someone like Dingwall makes their overseas production not to make a cheaper guitar. They actually made them, they call them ready to play. And the ready to play is a full Dingwall quality instrument that is exactly for what you said. It's because the musician can't wait 3 years for a Dingwall. And so they make this kind of serial production to do that. And so for me, that still qualifies as boutique because, as I said, it's the uncompromised vision. So the moment someone like PRS went from making their uncompromised guitars to making an SE series with a set of pickups and a bridge they would just never imagine giving to John Mayer to play, or Carlos Santana. Now we've compromised the vision for me, which is fine because I certainly couldn't afford one of those guitars when I was young. Everyone needs a cheap guitar to play. Not good or bad, just is. So now that we've defined boutique, and I suspect that most people are talking about the limited handmade production guitars, or a lot of human interaction.
Yes.
Small production guitars. I think it's going to take a similar trajectory that every guitar movement has taken, but we're at a stage right now where there is access to information like there never has been before. There's access to materials and machinery like there never has been before. In the same way that I don't need a TV studio to record what we're doing right now. It's on a MacBook Pro with the camera is actually a continuity camera on my iPhone, that I'm using right here, with, maybe $1,000 worth of lighting that I've improved at this point. Guitar making is the same thing. So people now can do things they didn't used to be able to do. And so a lot of guitar makers these days are not spending years in a wood shop honing their skills. They're making guitars the same way we make albums these days, with technology and learning fast and learning on the fly and using modern technology. And so I think that's really fascinating for the future of guitar because although we're going to lose craft knowledge because we're not passing it from master to apprentice, I think we're going to gain possibilities because the younger person right now grows up already thinking about the user interface, the user experience, ergonomics, and has the ability to do things that it used to take a team of people to do, that they can do on their own now. Just the same way that you can record an album that used to take a team of people to do. And so I think there's great possibilities coming out in the future. As far as the resale model is concerned, there is always money in growing something and access to it. And so I think we're going to see a substantial refinement or culling of the marketplace that sold what we now think of as popular instruments, because the people who cared about them are dying. And the heroes of the guitar will be sustained by cultural reenactors, and they will always keep a portion of that marketplace. But the young people I'm talking, and when I say young, you're talking to a guy who's almost 50 now, talking about young people. So I mean, people who were between 20 and 30 years old, I'm calling young. When they think back to these things, when I talk about the history about the guitar and what they cared about, they're telling me about Ibanez 7-string guitars. They're telling me about the musicians they listened to all had to play used Ibanez gems because no one made a 7-string guitar currently, in the same way that a bunch of musicians grabbed Les Pauls when Les Pauls weren't being made. They didn't value them. And so we have this sort of period where there's something made, it has an explosion, but then dies off for a little bit, and then musicians create valuable music on it that we have to play, but the tools don't yet exist. And so headless guitars, multi-scale guitars, extended range guitars, all of these sold in remarkable numbers on the most recent Boutique Guitar Showcase tour. And to people between 50 to 80 years old, not to young kids. And so the idea of what the guitar is has changed. And thanks to people like Ned Steinberger and Ken Parker and Michael Greenfield and Sheldon Dingwall and so on and so forth, and Ibanez, and ESP, these companies, I think that the guitar has a bright future. It remains a mechanical user interface, which allows us to extend our human body beyond its own capacity in a way that other instruments don't. The interaction between the string and the musician is an interplay that isn't satisfied with a keyboard touch, isn't satisfied with a computer touch or a trackpad touch. It's the literal physics of the bending string and that touch and that bounce that you kept referring to. So I think the guitar as a mechanical user interface has a very long future. But the
probably
players
what I should
will
have asked
continue
you
to change.
Sorry. I was going to say probably what I should have. Probably what I should have asked you was, what are you most excited about with guitars right now?
What am I most excited about? The thing I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, cool.
In the same way, when I go to a restaurant, I tell the waiter to bring me whatever they think will make me come back.
Yeah. They probably bring the thing that will make you never come back in that scenario. The difficult customer syndrome. Oh, this guy. I know what he's...
This guy. If you're in the right restaurant, that inspires them. If you're in the wrong restaurant, they're exactly what you just said. I'm excited about new possibilities. I'm excited about whether it be simple or complex. It doesn't matter to me. It depends on the moment. It's when you're a coffee drinker, you're a coffee connoisseur.
No, I'm not anymore.
I don't even know how to describe.
I don't care anymore.
You don't drink coffee at all anymore?
No, I definitely drink coffee, but I'm not a connoisseur. I had to remove that expectation from my life with travel.
The neuroses.
Yeah. Couldn't do it.
Okay. Well, regardless, you'll still understand what I'm talking about. Sometimes we have an espresso, the same espresso we make all the time.
Yeah.
We drink it like, oh, that is a really good cup. Why is it a really good cup? It's because whatever it is you ate previously that you don't even remember you just ate, or if you did just finish your lunch, it's relative to the moment and to your most recent experiences. And so guitars are the same way. I might be seeking perfection, but when we get too perfect, I'll be seeking imperfection as contrast.
Yeah, I definitely love the surprise of that thing of picking up an instrument where I feel like I've played everything ever. And I kind of have now, and I've played all my, kind of dream instruments. But yeah, actually it happens all the time, which is cool. You pick up things and you go, wow, like this is amazing and I could use this. And it could be a $300 guitar. It could be a $300,000 guitar, but there's definitely what I'm excited for is people like just working those finer things out more and more. You know, we haven't really spoken about Michael Greenfield, but he's one of those guys that chases those little things all the time and is trying to work out why, so that his guitars can be consistently, you know, delivering every time and lasting longer and, you know, working for whoever's playing them consistently. And I think that's really exciting, just seeing people develop, you know, that interaction between science and craftsmanship and being able to create these instruments that are more reproducible and more refined to, you know, what a player or what a builder actually wants them to achieve. Yeah, it's cool. And then whoever plays it takes it off in a different direction anyway. And that's the beauty of kind of music. Yeah.
The guitar is the people's instrument. It evolves with the people. The people's needs change, the guitar changes. Sometimes the guitar changes and musicians realize it can do something, and then the people's needs change, you know, or the inspiration changes. It's an interplay between them in a way that few other instruments in the world, if any, experience. And the guitar really grows with the people.
Yeah, it's pretty much the only instrument that's really evolving. Everything is exactly as it was. Yeah. Or maybe I'm just naive.
I just don't have enough time to consider that to answer the question solidly. So I was like, leaving some room to being wrong.
Yeah. Well,
so
you know,
Adam,
No, you go.
Thank you so much for being on the show, for being on Life with Strings Attached, for being a part of my life with Strings Attached.
Same, man.
You know, I feel it's a better world having you here. And let me say this as a compliment, and one of the reasons that I love interacting with you, and I'm glad you come to guitar shows, is because I can only think of maybe 3 musicians in the entire world that I can put a guitar into the hands of and know that they're going to find the guitar. And you're one of those 3 people.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Where you don't just download Adam Miller onto the guitar and judge it by how well it does you. You find what the guitar has to say and then have a conversation with it. And that is, well, you know what I mean. You know exactly what I'm talking about. People pick it up and they do their thing and they go, oh, it sucks because it doesn't do my thing.
Yeah.
You know? But you get to know it and you have a conversation with it. And that's, to me, the best way to approach a musical instrument. And so I really value your approach to the guitar. I love listening to you and your music. And anybody who's listening right now, if you haven't already checked out Adam Miller, please do so. Your website, adammiller.com.au for Australia, is that correct?
AU, yeah, correct.
Yeah. Adam's a wonderful musician and a wonderful person. And so thanks again.
Thanks, man.
For being on Life with Strings Attached, Adam.
An honor. Thanks, Jamie.
You've been listening to Life with Strings Attached. If today's conversation meant something to you, consider passing it on. These stories find their place through the people who share them. A new episode comes out every Friday, right here, wherever you're listening. I'm Jamie Gale, and thanks for listening to Life with Strings Attached.